Morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, depending on where I located in the world, and thank you for joining our global webcast today. During our today's session, we will focus on the U.S. EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program and how the program provides a pathway to permanent residency in the United States through investment. We'll cover various aspects of the program, including eligibility, investment requirements, application process, and how to choose a decent EB-5 project. My name is Dmitro. I'm advising private high net worth individuals and their families on various citizenship and residency by investment strategies. And at the same time, being a program manager for the US EB-5 program, I'm happy to guide you through the benefits and requirements of the program. Today, I'm joined by two fantastic experts in the EB-5 industry, George Gainey, a distinguished immigration attorney and the founding partner at Gainey Law Group. He will provide insights into legal aspects of the EB-5 with a particular focus on application process and eligibility requirements. Also with us is Nick Buenagurio, Senior Vice President at Can-Am Investor Services, one of the industry leading regional centers, who will share how Can-Am's project align with the EB-5 landscape. Let me introduce our company briefly before we get into the heart of the topic. So for those who are not familiar, Handling Partners is the leading company in residence and citizenship planning, helping high net worth families and individuals to find tailored solutions for their residency and citizenship goals. With over 60 offices and way over 25 years of experience, we have facilitated over 15 billion US dollars in foreign direct investment and helped over 25,000 clients and their families to diversify their residence and citizenship portfolio. Beyond residency solutions, we also provide a suite of additional services, including concierge support for lifestyle needs, education consulting to help families find the best opportunities in education for their children. Another big part of our business is the government advisory practice, where we work with various countries and governments to design, implement, and actually improve the existing investment immigration solutions. For those interested in the United States, the EB-5 program is an important part of our portfolio, which you can see now on the screen, offering clients a way to access the world's largest economy, top-tier education, and the globally recognized passport. Yeah, before we go into the EB-5 itself, please feel free to put any questions you might have in the Q&A section down below. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. So for anyone new to the EB-5 program, it's the U.S. immigration pathway that allows qualified investors and their families to obtain the U.S. green card. The program was originally designed and implemented by the U.S. government early in 1990s, and the main goal was to attract foreign capital and create jobs for U.S. workers, giving qualified investors the right to become a permanent resident as a return. What benefits does the EB-5 program give its investors and their families? Well, obviously, that's the right to settle in any of the 50 states of the US. It's the possibility to obtain a permanent residency, or as we know, as we all call it, a green card, get access to a range of top-tier schools and Ivy League universities, ability to include the close family members to the application, spouse and kids who are under 21 years of age and not married, and of course the option to apply for U.S. citizenship after 5 years of permanent residency. The EB-5 program was heavily improved back in 2022 after the RIA, which is known as the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act. It introduced essential changes to the program. The legislation was designed to increase transparency, accountability, and investor protections. For instance, it mandates greater oversight of the regional centers, introduces stricter fund management rules, and establishes a structured process and timeline. By addressing this concern, the RIA has helped bring even more trust in EB-5, making it a more attractive and secure option for international investors. Well, the past year or over the past 2 years, I can tell that we've seen the heightened interest in the EB-5 program. The demand surges due to a part of the global environment, whether economic shifts or geopolitical factors. Individuals and families are seeking stability and growth in new markets. But it's also a response to the RRA reforms, which have made EB-5 a more transparent and predictable program, which I assume was not very much that before 2022. From our perspective at Henley, we're seeing two main client profiles in this post-RRA environment. First are the clients and prospects from emerging markets facing uncertain economic or political stability and who want a long-term residency options. And second, we're working with clients and prospects from established portfolios in regions like Europe, Asia, Middle East, and who are now eyeing the US market as a hedge and diversity strategy for them and for their families. So the RRA reform made EB-5 a more appealing option for both these groups by increasing accountability and reliability, as I said. So a few words on the eligibility requirements, which we will cover in more detail further on. So to qualify for the program, investors must make a minimum investment of $800,000 in the project located in the target employment area, or $1,050,000 into the non-target employment area, creating at least 10 full-time permanent jobs for the US workers. This combination of investment with job creation makes EB-5 unique, as it directly supports the US economic development and providing residency route for the investors. And of course, the funds, the investment capital must come from a 100% lawful source, and George will also cover eligibility requirements on this in a few minutes more deeply. The funds should also stay in the particular project for a few years, depending on how the project is structured. It can be something in between 3 to 5 years usually. The law says it should be 2 years in the project, but the projects are usually structured for 3+ years. Now let's move to various legal and processing aspects, and I'm happy to give a word to George. Feel free to drop me a message to find out more about the US or any other residence or citizenship program. You can scan a QR code that you see on the screen right now and text me on WhatsApp or send me an email. Also, please don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A session down below. And now I'm going to stop sharing and give a word to George Gainey. George, would you be able to share, or do you want me to share?
Yeah, if you could share, that'd be great. Well, while you get that pulled up, I'll just start with the first slide, which is introducing my law firm. I'm the founding partner of Gainey Law Group. We are a private client U.S. immigration law firm. And so on this panel, I'm very happy to have been invited by Henley and Partners and have it participate with Nick from Can-Am. But just to be clear, we represent individual clients and their family members in U.S. immigration matters. So that means that our individual clients and their families hire us, and we represent their immigration interests before various U.S. federal agencies. We're located in Washington, D.C., as I said, about a mile north of the White House. That doesn't mean that we can walk into the Oval Office and pick up your green card from Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, depending on how the elections go next week. Should be interesting. But being in DC, it's a great town to be a lawyer in, and it's a great place to have and make connections with people who are in government and who can help us move the needle as needed. Because of the nature of our practice, we've represented lots of clients in EB-5 matters. The attorneys at our firm have reviewed prepared, filed over 1,000 EB-5 related petitions at my firm and at various firms where they've worked previously. And we have lots of language capabilities. Really like working with our clients, working very closely with them, understanding what their goals are, understanding what the timelines are, and tailoring solutions. So Demetria, maybe you could go to the next slide. This will just give a very brief overview of a couple topics that we'll talk about today. I'll try to keep it short so that we have time to hear from the other panelists. Looks like it's super zoomed in, but there we go. So we'll talk first about EB-5 requirements. Then we'll talk about adjustment of status versus consular processing. We'll take a quick look at a timeline in an adjustment of status context specifically, and then we'll just try to summarize, mechanics of EB-5 and how all the pieces kind of fit together. So when we talk about EB-5 requirements, I think it's important to take one step back and understand that EB-5 is a green card category. And in every green card process, there are two phases. There's an petition phase, and then there's an application phase. So when we talk about these technical requirements, we're talking about the petition phase. And there are two main overarching requirements. One is the investment of $800,000 at a minimum, and the other is the creation of 10 new full-time jobs in the United States. So those are the two very basic seeming requirements for the EB-5 visa petition, but we'll unpack them here. And, as always with immigration, there's more to the picture than meets the eye. The investment of $800,000, I think a good analogy to understand the investment and source of funds for the investment is to think of $800,000 liquid, ready to be invested, whether it's in a fixed deposit or just sitting in a savings account or a checking account. You think of that as fruit. We need to explain and document for USCIS, which is the Immigration Authority, the tree that gave us the fruit, but also the seed or the sapling that grew into the tree that gave us the fruit. So for example, if we're going to use the sale of an apartment or another piece of real property, the proceeds of that sale would be, the liquid funds would be the fruit. The tree would be the purchase of the real property in the first instance. And then the seed would be where the client actually obtained the funds from to buy the property, which they then sold. So that would kind of be the life cycle source of funds. Source of funds, to make the investment, it can be a loan, it can be a gift, but we do need to document the full life cycle of the transaction. And it has to be invested by the client, his or herself as a physical person. So we can't use entities or trusts to make these investments. It actually has to be the person who's going to petition for the EB-5 visa, making the investment his or herself. You can go to the next slide, Demetrio. So as we said, requirement number one, investment of $800,000. Requirement number two, the creation of 10 new full-time jobs. And there's two ways to create 10 new full-time jobs. One is a client could open his or her own business in the United States and hire 10 people. That's very complicated because those employees need to be full-time. They need to stay on payroll for about 2.5 years at a minimum. And they need to be W-2 employees, meaning that they're direct employees of the business that the client invests into. And so Congress, understanding this and wanting to sort of create and foment more investment into the United States through the EB-5 program, set up a concept called a regional center. And Nick will, talk more about, what a regional center is, especially in the context of Can-Am, which has had a lot of success. So a regional center can count jobs that have been created indirectly. So that means that instead of a client having to invest into a brick and mortar business in the United States and actually run that business, which can be very complicated just on its own, and even more complicated because you have to hire 10, employees in the United States, a regional center offers a more passive investment. It doesn't require any active, day-to-day management of an entity or a business in the United States. And for that reason, it's overwhelmingly popular with individuals who are seeking green cards through EB-5. And this diagram provides like a small, very basic, simple structure of how you can think about a regional center and what its role is in the job creating activity. I would say almost all projects in the United States that are sponsored by regional centers are related to construction. Some new type of real property asset is being constructed, and because of that extremely high cost of building something from the ground up, lots of jobs are created, and those are credited to clients who are seeking EB-5 visas. Maybe the next slide here, Demetrio. So as I said at the very beginning, in every green card process, there's the petition phase, and then there's the application phase. And at the petition phase, everybody does something different to a certain degree. That's where you lay out how it is that you qualify for a green card and how you meet the technical requirements of the particular green card category. So in the EB-5 context, you say, I've made an $800,000 investment in the United States. That's going to create 10 new full-time jobs. But you could very well imagine another client saying, well, I won a gold medal in Olympic weightlifting, or I married a US citizen, or a business in the United States is going to sponsor me for a job. And so in that regard, everybody does something different at the petition phase. Once the petition is approved, typically you move on to the application phase. And the application phase is a very standardized process. Everyone does basically the same thing. It's biographic documents, background checks, medical exam, police clearance certificates. It's a standardized process to make sure that the client is something called admissible to the United States, basically meaning they don't have any criminal issues and they don't have any prior US immigration status violations. Maybe you could go to the next slide, Demetrio. So usually what happens, if a client is outside the United States, the client first files the petition, we wait for it to be approved, and then we move on to the application phase. And the application phase is completed at a US embassy or consulate abroad. If, however, the client is inside the United States, we can do the petition and the application phase at the same time. So we file the petition and the green card application at the same time. And we also file a request for work and for travel authorization. And so this was an important change that took place in March of 2022 with the passage of the RIA that Demetrio mentioned previously. And it's a huge advantage for individuals who are in the United States on some other type of work visa, like an H or an L visa. Individuals who are in the US, maybe even on a different type of investor visa called E2, and individuals who are in the United States as students. It's very, very popular with international students. Why? Because it takes clients out of depending on an employer for visa sponsorship, and it allows them to remain in the United States until they receive their green card with work and travel authorization. So basically what adjustment of status does is it gives the client all the upside of the green card itself without the client actually having received his or her green card yet. So again, that's a very big change that took place prior to the passage of the RIA. A client would have to wait for his or her visa petition to be approved before they could actually file for adjustment of status if they were otherwise eligible. Now, just by being in the United States in a lawful non-immigrant visa status, assuming you comply with some other technical requirements, you can access adjustment of status, which is a big change, which I think is also driving a lot of demand in EB-5. So now we can just take a look on the next slide at a timeline. This is assuming that a client is filing for adjustment of status from inside the United States. So a client makes the investment in full, files his or her visa petition with USCIS, along with an application for adjustment of status. And what we're seeing is that clients can expect their visa petition to be approved within about 2 years. If a client is making a filing into something called a rural area, which is pretty much what it sounds like, a project located in a rural area inside the United States, they get their visa petition approved closer to about 10 months, sometimes as little as 6 months. And that's because also with the RIA, Congress wanted to incentivize more investment into these rural areas in the United States. And so they allowed for something called prioritized processing for those visa petitions. So again, in a conservative case where a client's even filing in a rural area, they can expect for their petition to be approved and thus for their green card to be issued when making an adjustment of status filing within about 2 years. That's a pretty conservative estimate, I would say. But as you can see, within about the first 3 months of having made that filing, the clients receive work and travel authorization. And what we're also seeing is those work and travel authorizations are valid for 5 years. So that more than bridges the gap between when the client files and when they actually receive their green card. One other just sort of technical piece here in this yellow band that we're seeing, the approval of the EB-5 visa petition is a condition precedent for the client's actual green card application to be approved and issued. So it doesn't happen automatically, but again, what we've seen is that within a couple of weeks of the petition being approved, the green card is issued very quickly thereafter. This yellow timeline also holds for individuals who are making a filing in a consular processing context, meaning they've filed their visa petition, they're outside the United States, and they're going to complete their green card processing, the application phase, at a US consulate or embassy abroad. It's just that you can remove that portion where they have work and travel authorization within those first 90 or so days. And then, as you can see, the EB-5 provides something called a conditional or provisional green card. At first, it's valid for 2 years. So a year and 9 months after having received that initial 2-year green card, the client goes back to USCIS and explains, I maintained my investment at risk for the requisite period, and the project went well. It created the 10 new full-time jobs that we said it would. So I'd like my full 10-year green card with no conditions. Sometimes clients hear conditional and they think, okay, there's conditions. Do I need to make another investment? Do I need to, spend more than half the year inside the United States? What are the conditions? But in a technical sense, really the only condition is you maintained your investment at risk, and the regional center, did what they said that they were going to do with your money. They created the jobs. And then ultimately, the client receives his or her, full 10-year green card at the end of this timeline. Processing times on that removal condition application are a little bit all over the place. Hence, we go conservative and say, hey, you can think that, this full life cycle from when you make your investment until you actually receive your full, 10-year green card, it can take anywhere from 5 to 7 years. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Dimitro, and try to just sort of summarize how EB-5 works. This is just another graphic. EB-5 again has two main requirements: an investment of $800,000 and the creation of 10 new full-time jobs. A client demonstrates lawful source of funds, makes an investment into a project that's sponsored by a regional center. The regional center ensures that the funds will be deployed in such a way that's going to create 10 new full-time jobs per investor in the particular fund. And because the client has demonstrated that they've made an $800,000 investment and created 10 new full-time jobs, that renders an EB-5 green card. The next slide is just our contact information. This is where my office is located at 16th and P in Washington, D.C. Again, happy to answer questions in the Q&A and speak with clients about their private client U.S. immigration needs. Thanks for having me, Dimitro, and looking forward to answering some questions.
Thanks, George. Yeah, we have questions coming in, but we're going to address them at the very end of the session. Now I'm happy to introduce Mr. Nick Bonagurio, Senior Vice President of Can-Am Investor Services, and he'll cover very interesting topic on how to pick up a good EB-5 project. Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you very much, Dimitro, and to Henley and Partners for hosting us. And thank you, George, for that excellent description of how the actual immigration process works. So again, my name is Nick Bonagurio. I am Senior Vice President at Can-Am Investor Services, which is the in-house broker-dealer of Can-Am Enterprises, one of the leading regional centers in the EB-5 industry. So broadly speaking, when you're thinking about EB-5, there are going to be multiple parties that you're going to want to partner with. One is certainly an advisor like Henley and Partners. They're going to help you evaluate EB-5 and decide whether or not it's a good option for you and your family. And if your goal is permanent residency in the United States, if you do have the means to make the investment, it often is the easiest way to get permanent residency in the United States. But certainly start with a team like Henley and Partners. Then you will need an immigration attorney, someone like George Gainey. They're going to be preparing your source of funds. They're going to be filing your applications for you, really holding your hand throughout the process. And then the final counterparty is a regional center. A regional center is an organization that's been given authorization from the US government to sponsor qualified projects in the United States, qualified EB-5 projects that will help facilitate your EB-5 immigration. So that's what our role is. And a brief background on our firm, Can-Am, we've actually been working in immigration by investment for over 35 years. We first started in Canadian immigration by investment back in 1987. We raised about $500 million in that program. And then we entered the US EB-5 program in the early 2000s. And that's been our core business ever since. We've been doing nothing but EB-5 for the last 2 decades. And in that time, we've really gone on to work with over 7,000 families from all across the globe making EB-5 investments. We've sponsored almost 70 EB-5 projects. And we have become the regional center leader in the only important success metrics, which are 1, getting our clients their permanent green cards, and 2, repaying them their capital. Our firm is based in Manhattan, but we do have staff all over the world. And although our firm is based in Manhattan, we actually have regional centers and regional center authorization all over the United States. I always like to clarify a regional center is just an authorization from the US government that allows us to sponsor a project in certain locations in the country. So Can-Am's first regional center was in the city of Philadelphia. We have many, many projects in the city of Philadelphia. But then as we've grown over the last few decades, we've continued to get additional authorizations in other parts of the country. And now we can have projects across 36 states. So we sponsor projects all over the country in all different types of asset classes, but they're all managed out of our headquarters in Manhattan. But we do have staff and representatives all over the world. And Can-Am was also the very first regional center to get registered and regulated by FINRA and the SEC, the financial regulators. We were the very first regional center to recognize that these are financial securities, and we really led the EB-5 industry in securities compliance, which is certainly very important as well. As George very eloquently explained, there's going to be a couple steps in the EB-5 process, and there's really 2 important immigration milestones that an EB-5 investor should be thinking about for them and for their family. The first immigration milestone is to get the investor and their family, specifically their spouse and any children under the age of 21, those are the family members that are included in the application, a conditional green card or a temporary green card. And that's going to be achieved by the very first application in this process being approved, which is called the I-526E petition. And before the Reform and Integrity Act, it was simply called the I-526 petition. At that stage, USCIS is really evaluating 2 crucial data points. They're evaluating your source of funds prepared by an immigration attorney such as George. And they also are verifying that the investment that you're making qualifies for EB-5 immigration benefits. And that's our role in the process, making sure the project qualifies. And thus far at Can-Am, we have over 5,200 I-526 and I-526E petition approvals. Again, a single petition includes the investor, their spouse, and their children under the age of 21. So our over 5,200 approvals actually represents well over 15,000, now approaching 16,000 conditional green cards for our investors and their immediate family members. The next immigration milestone is for your family to get your permanent green card, or said differently, to have those conditions removed, making your green card permanent. And that's going to be achieved by the second application in this process being approved, which is the I-829 petition. And one of the key things USCIS is evaluating for is verifying that at least 10 full-time jobs were created with your investment. And that is all our responsibility at the regional center. For the investor, this is very much a passive investment and a passive process. You make your investment after doing your due diligence on the regional center and the projects we have available. If you decide you're comfortable with the regional center and the project, you make your investment after your source of funds is complete, and then we do the rest of the work and work very, very closely with your immigration attorney to facilitate your EB-5 immigration. And at the I-829 stage, thus far, Can-Am has over 2,600 I-829 petition approvals. That is number 1 in the EB-5 industry. And that represents close to 9,000 permanent green cards issued to our investors and their family members. Again, number one among all of the regional center groups. A very common question I get from new prospective and EB-5 investor families is understanding why is there a gap between the I-526 and I-829 petition approvals. The I-829 approvals is a little more than half. Understandably, people want to know, why is that? And the answer is processing time. As George explained, the whole EB-5 immigration process is going to take somewhere between 5 to 7 years. And very commonly, the gap between the I-526 approval and the I-829 approval is about 4 or 5 years, sometimes longer. But at Can-Am, we have never had either of these petitions ever denied due to anything project related. We have no I-526 denials due to the merits of our projects. We have no I-829 denials due to insufficient job creation. We have a very, very small number of families who have gotten denials, and it's all due to individual personal investor issues, and even those are very rare. And in addition to our robust immigration track record, in terms of repayment, Can-Am has already repaid back over $2 billion from our projects. In fact, we've had more repayments over the course of the last year, and now we're now up to $2.27 billion of repaid capital, which is the leader in the industry by a very large margin. We are certainly very proud of what we've accomplished over the years, but we do understand that for a new prospective EB-5 investor family, someone who's evaluating the program and regional centers and understanding, how do we know any of this information is accurate? So we do take the additional step at Can-Am of having our track record audited by a global accounting firm every year. They do a full forensic audit verifying the I-526 approvals, the I-829 approvals, and the repayment numbers so that our clients can know that this is verified information. This is certainly a very large investment for any family, and it's also a very personal investment for any family. So having trust and transparency in your counterparties is crucial. And one of the ways we've been so successful in EB-5 is really first by working with very, very high quality partners. That's really the first piece of the puzzle at Can-Am. We like to work with very well-established, experienced developers, people that have different sources of financing for their projects, and EB-5 is providing a piece of the financing for the project. And we've been very fortunate over the years to work with some fantastic partners. We've worked with some of the world's largest global developers, people like Tishman Speyer, for example. We've done many projects with them. They have about $80 billion of project globally. We've done several with that, and a special one is the new global headquarters of the pharmaceutical firm Pfizer in New York City. Very, very special project, a multi-billion-dollar project. We've worked with large asset managers, people like the Fortress Investment Group. We've worked with them and their affiliates many times over the years in various types of projects. A special project we've done with Fortress was building the largest private railroad in the state of Florida. That was called All Aboard Florida, or in the state of Florida, they call it the Bright Line. And it's a railroad that goes from Orlando down to Miami. That project was extremely successful and also repaid to Can-Am a $350 million EB-5 loan repayment, which was the largest EB-5 loan repayment in the industry's history, not just at Can-Am, but in the entire industry. We have worked with major universities. We've done student housing. We've done medical facilities. We have done all types of infrastructure projects. We have built ports. We've worked with utility companies. This past year, we've been doing many projects in the fiber internet space. We're working with internet service providers building high-speed fiber internet in locations of the country that may not have access to high-speed internet. And this is a national initiative. Many of these projects even have government grants they're eligible for, because it really is a national initiative for the entire country. And we have many, many special projects, but we also have very common projects as well. We've also done several multifamily projects this year, sometimes in rural locations or other. But again, whether we're building a railroad, whether we're building out internet infrastructure, or whether we're building a multifamily, the first piece of the puzzle is working with a high quality developer. Then after we select a developer to work with, also I think it's important to note that we ourselves are not a developer. Can-Am is not a development company. We are a lender. We vet projects. We look at well over 100 projects a year and select maybe 3 to 4 a year to partner with. And if a project meets our requirements, really through 2 lenses. One is going to be from an immigration lens. We want to make sure that we're creating enough jobs to get our clients their green cards. And then also a financial safety lens. We want to make sure that the investment is safe for our clients so they feel confident, and we all feel confident that they will get their money back at the end of the project. If a project meets those requirements, we will provide a construction loan to a project. So we are a lender. And when you do speak with regional centers, make sure you do have a very clear understanding of the relationship between a regional center and a developer. Those relationships can vary. We are an independent third party. We are a lender. We'll take groups of investors, maybe 50 investors, maybe 100 investors, and we'll pool their funds. For every single project, we will form a new limited partnership. We act as the general partner. We manage the investment. The EB-5 investor families from all over the world are the limited partners. And then the partnership, very simply, is acting like a bank. The partnership is providing a loan to a developer, a construction loan, a simple interest term loan. And those terms will vary by project. I would say commonly expect anywhere from 4 to 6 years for a loan term. So just like a bank, we're providing a loan. We like to work with very high quality developers. So we're offering them attractive capital or attractive interest rates for our piece of the project budget. But again, we're never going to be all of the financing for a project. And they're paying that interest rate to the partnership. The EB-5 investor families do get an annual interest distribution, but we're very transparent. It's typically a low rate of return. Commonly the rate of return for the individual EB-5 investors or the limited partners is going to be, less than 0.5% per year, which is not a meaningful rate of return. But very humbly, it's not designed to be. The investment is very specifically designed to get the investor family their permanent green card and also to protect and return their capital. And it's by working with these types of very high quality borrowers that qualify for these types of rates that we've been able to lead the industry in both permanent green cards and repaid capital. Another component of the way that we structure these investments is we at Can-Am are never in physical possession of your funds. Your funds are first wired to a third-party escrow bank. And we also participate with a third-party fund administrator, a fund administrator that is overseeing the flow of your funds going into escrow, going into the project. They're really there to protect investors, to really oversee all of the funds going in and out of the project and protect you from fraud. So we have third-party oversight of all of our projects. At the end of the loan term, the principal is repaid back to the partnership, and the partnership repays the individual $800,000 units to the investors. So that's the way the actual structure works. In addition to working with our fund administrator for fund oversight, recently we also engaged with our fund administrator and several other EB-5 industry experts to prepare a due diligence report for EB-5 investors and new prospective investors. And this report is to help new people understand what are some of the things that they should be thinking about when they're evaluating a regional center, when they're evaluating the EB-5 project. It's an extensive report. I certainly encourage you to read the full report, and we won't have time to cover the entire report today. But I would like to cover maybe just a few key points to give you an idea of some of the things you should be thinking about when you're evaluating an EB-5 project. One of the first key elements you should be thinking about when you're doing due diligence is certainly choose a reliable regional center. That is step number one. You want an experienced regional center with a strong track record and a track record for the entire cycle of the EB-5 process. That entire cycle includes getting your conditional green card with the I-526 approval, getting your permanent green card with the I-829 approval, and repayment of capital. So you want to make sure you're working with an experienced regional center that has experience in all cycles of EB-5, and one that is also compliant with USCIS. That is also another crucial component of a reliable regional center. Both Dimitro and George mentioned that the EB-5 program was most recently reauthorized by a piece of legislation called the Reform and Integrity Act. And that made many new changes to the program, many new protections for investors. And when you speak with regional centers, you certainly want to make sure that the regional center partner is very compliant with all USCIS requirements and all of the new requirements of the Reform and Integrity Act. Also, in terms of selecting a reliable regional center, certainly some type of third-party oversight is always helpful. That's why we work with a third-party fund administrator that helps protect our clients, overseeing the flow of their funds. And at Can-Am, we also think it's very important to work with a firm that takes U.S. securities compliance very seriously as well. The next key element of doing EB-5 due diligence is to understand how your investment is structured. There's different ways to make an EB-5 investment into a development project. Again, most commonly, we're creating these jobs by building a new asset. That new asset could be a hotel, it could be an infrastructure asset, it could be a multifamily project. There's different types of projects, but the jobs are being created through the physical construction of those assets. And making investments into those assets can be done in two typical ways. One common way to make an investment into a development asset is by lending that development money, making a debt investment or acting like a bank and providing a construction loan to a developer. And that's the way that Can-Am structures all of our investments. We exclusively use the debt option because there's traditionally meaningful safety enhancements that come from being in a debt position. They will have lower rates of return, but they do have very meaningful safety enhancements. Another way to make an investment into an EB-5 project is as an equity investment. An equity investment is essentially buying an ownership share of the asset you're building. And equity investments traditionally have more risk associated with them, but do have higher rates of return. So all EB-5 investors need to assess their own personal risk tolerance. Generally speaking, we think the gold standard is to prioritize getting your green card and getting your money back, but every investor needs to make that personal risk assessment on their own. Then within those two buckets of debt and equity, there's also subcategories. Within the debt category, you could be a senior lender, which is very commonly a big bulge bracket bank like a Wells Fargo or a Bank of America or maybe a private equity fund. EB-5 can also be a senior lender. And senior lenders have the most protection. They're the first people to get their money back. You can also still be in a debt position, but also be a junior lender or what's known as a mezzanine lender. Mezzanine lenders do have more protection than equity investors, but they sit below the senior loan. And even in the equity bucket, there's different types of equity. There's common equity, which is the lowest person on the totem pole in terms of repayment, but will have the highest rates of return. And then there's preferred equity, which will have more protection than common equity, but less protection than someone in a debt position. So understand which bucket you're in and what your priority of repayment is within that bucket. And then, of course, you do want to evaluate what protections are in the investment. We act like a bank, just like a bank. We'll have different types of collateral. We'll have physical assets we may have a lien on. We can have pledges of equity from the developer. We can use other commercial terms like corporate repayment guarantees from guarantors. So when you're evaluating projects, certainly have a very clear understanding of what those protections are to make your investment safe. Another key element of EB-5 due diligence is going to be at the project level. And projects are going to be in many different types of asset classes. They're going to be in many different locations around the country. So you're going to have very nuanced risks that are associated with each type of development, each type of asset class, and each type of location. But there are some common red flags across asset classes you should consider. One, definitely look out for unproven developers. You don't want to be making a speculative investment here. You want to be working with a proven developer, someone that has executed time and time again. Also, be on the lookout for unrealistic financial terms or unrealistic timelines. If the project is making unrealistic profitability projections, is the project promoting very, very high unrealistic rates of return? Also, timelines is certainly a very hot topic in EB-5 right now. The Reform and Integrity Act did make some changes to help investors get their funds back earlier than they have gotten in years past. But from both an immigration perspective and a financial safety perspective, there will be limits to how short an investment term can be. I would say commonly expect at least a 3.5 to 4 year term to both safely achieve your immigration goals and to safely have your capital repaid to you. And sometimes even longer, sometimes a 5th or 6 years necessary. So do, at the very least, ask some additional questions if you see projects that have very, very short or unrealistic timelines from either an immigration perspective or a repayment perspective. And another red flag, do not make any investing decisions based simply on marketing materials. When you look at projects, you'll certainly have presentations from various regional centers. You'll look at fact sheets. You'll look at brochures. And they may be very exciting and very interesting. But what's most important is reviewing the offering documents. The offering documents are the legal agreements. They're typically about 200 pages of documentation, which includes the full scope of the project, the full physical scope of what you're building. They have all the agreements between the regional center and the developer they're lending your money to. They also have all the agreements between the regional center and the EB-5 investors and all of the material terms, all of the various risk disclaimers. Also, sometimes projects may have an initial term. They may have extension options. Please be certain to very carefully review the offering documents and do not simply make an investing decision off of marketing material or a flashy project. You want a reliable project. You want a safe project. You want to get your green card. You want to get your money back. And before I turn things back to Dimitro, I think just generally speaking, always just make a large holistic evaluation of your EB-5 project and your EB-5 regional center. Do not make an investment specifically on one individual data point. For example, I know George mentioned previously that there are rural projects in the market. We have many as well, and they do have what's known as priority processing, which is helpful, but it's a bit of a vague term from USCIS. There's no clear definition of exactly what priority processing means. Can-Am has actually done a survey with other regional centers to evaluate petition approvals and what we're seeing in both rural and high employment projects. And thus far, what we're seeing is about a 4-month difference on average. Again, not just at Can-Am, across regional centers between the I-526 approval times of rural and high employment projects. Again, that could change over time as more petitions continue to be approved, that window could get tighter, that window could get larger. But that's just one data point. Evaluate the quality of the regional center, evaluate the quality of the capital stack, evaluate the nuances that are specific to the project you're investing in, and certainly review the offering documents. And with that, I'd like to turn things back over to Dimitro to open it up for questions. Thank you again, Dimitro and Henley & Partners, for having us.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for the presentation. I see there's quite a big number of questions. We have another 15 to 20 minutes to address those questions, and I'll try to pick up those ones that will not require another hour to discuss. And yeah, if you have a complex question, please feel free to text me on either in WhatsApp or in my email, and then we can schedule a one-to-one consultation. So first question is, at what point of time the EB-5 holder is subject to the US tax? George, maybe you can tell just briefly 1 to 10 sentences on this.
Yeah, I've been on a lot of those calls. I'm not a tax attorney, but not legal advice. Typical attorney answer, it'll definitely depend. Because you can become subject to, U.S. tax. You can become a resident for income tax purposes without holding a green card. So that'll be where you'll check first. But all things being equal, it's when you enter the U.S. With your green card status, is my understanding. Again, that's assuming that the client is going through something called consular processing. They're not pursuing adjustment status, but you'll definitely want to talk with a tax advisor, whether that's like a great tax attorney or a good CPA, and engage in something called pre-immigration tax planning. Immigration and tax are two sides of the same coin. Usually, when we have a conversation with a client, sometimes it comes from a tax planning perspective, sometimes it comes from an immigration planning perspective, but long story short, talk to a tax advisor.
Thanks, George. And another question from the same individual. How long must an Indian national wait before getting an EB-5? The same with the China national and other Asian nationals.
Yeah, so implicit in that question is an acknowledgement that historically there's been really high demand from individuals born in mainland China and born in India for EB-5. So historically there have been visa backlogs, which makes getting a green card take a lot longer. But because of the passage of the RIA and the provisions related to something called set-asides, both for rural and for high unemployment, those long wait times created by backlogs don't exist right now. Eventually they will, most likely, probably not in 2025, but maybe sometime in 2026 or 2027. So how long does an Indian or Chinese national need to wait? Same amount of time as anyone else. As that timeline showed, if you're outside the US, a conservative estimate is about 2 years. Because again, there's no backlog currently for new investors from India or mainland China. And then for other nationalities, it's the same amount of time. Everyone's sort of in the same boat right now.
Okay, thanks, George. There's quite a number on the source of funds, questions on the source of funds. So I'll try to pick up the most interesting ones. To get an EB-5 visa, how far you need to show your tax records, and in the case of an elderly person who doesn't have all these documents, is it a problem? Because the money of investment will come from a house sale. I think we have a lot of cases.
In the case of a what person, sorry?
No, sorry, I've lost the question.
That's okay. Long story short, there's a statutory, so we ask for 10 years of tax filings for individual clients.
Elderly person who doesn't have all the documents, is it a problem?
I see. No, that's not necessarily a problem. If certain documents don't exist, we can, proactively explain that to the immigration authority. And I think another good point to keep in mind is that we need to meet a credibility standard, meaning that our goal when we represent a client is to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, almost do like a forensic audit just of the investment and, some cost related to the investment. We don't have to prove their whole net worth. It's not, I think, for Malta or I don't know. I know there are other programs that you offer that where you have to prove the person's entire net worth. We're just limited to the $800,000 here. And we have to meet a credibility standard. So if certain documents don't exist or aren't available for, a lawful reason, that's not necessarily going to preclude the client from pursuing an EB-5 visa petition. The sale of a home is a very common scenario, as is, borrowing against a home, securing a loan with a home or other assets. We also see a lot of loans secured by portfolios, kind of back-to-back loans from clients who don't necessarily want to sell any of their assets or positions or change sort of their financial planning strategy. So loans are perfectly fine. Like I said, as are gifts. We have a lot of international student clients whose parents will gift them funds so that they can pursue EB-5 with a concurrent filing for adjustment of status from inside the US.
Okay, thanks. Another two questions from the same individual. Cost breakdown. Other than investment amount itself, what are their additional costs and their breakdown of amount and timeline? Well, to make it a long story short, the additional costs are about 65 to 80,000 US dollars as the administrative fee of the original center. It depends on the original center and on the project. Lawyers' fees, which really depend on the number of family members and where the source of funds comes from. It's usually in between 25 to 35,000 US dollars. And of course, the filing fees, which are now, if I'm not mistaken, roughly about 15,000 US dollars. The second part of the question is, I would address again to George. What are the requirements of source of funds? Do all of it have to be from foreign country bank? If any, what percentage could be a loan or borrowed money from a foreign bank? Can it be a bank in the US? Can it be from an individual? Can it be a gift?
Yes, great questions. Doesn't matter. Long story short, it doesn't matter so long as we can document that full sort of seed, tree, fruit life cycle that I was talking about. In the case of a loan from a non-financial institution, meaning from any source other than a company that's routinely engaged and licensed to provide loans and act as a bank or a financial institution, we need to not only do the seed, tree, fruit for the investor, his or herself. So we don't just say, well, it's a loan and here's the money being transferred to me. We have to do that exercise for the person actually providing the liquid capital, to make the loan. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. If you're asking, Uncle Timmy for a loan, it's not as simple as him just agreeing to make the loan and having a private loan agreement between the two individuals. We also have to go to Uncle Timmy and ask him for documentation of his source of funds to actually make the loan. But it doesn't have to be US situs asset. It doesn't have to be all foreign assets. It can be a mix. Part can be a loan, part can be a gift. We can mix and match. So what we do at the very beginning of every, kind of engagement or representing a client is we get on a call with them. We discuss source of funds in a great amount of detail because that's going to really set them up for success over the life cycle of, the EB-5 process, which, as we've discussed, in totality can take, in excess of 5 years. So you want to get that right from the very beginning.
Okay, so the next question is I would address to Nick about the repayment. Is repayment related to the completion or success of a specific project at the regional center, or repayment is totally independent and occurs at set time regardless of the state of the project chosen?
Well, it will certainly vary by regional center. At Can-Am, again, we're providing loans to developers, and the most common way that the EB-5 loans are repaid is via refinancing. So our borrowers are not paying us with revenues from the business or cash on their balance sheet per se. What they're doing is they're repaying us via refinancing. So an EB-5 loan is a construction loan like any other, whether you're getting a construction loan from Bank of America or from a private equity lender or from a regional center, it's a construction loan. And most construction loans across all different types of asset classes are most commonly repaid via refinancing. And refinancing is going to be commonly based on two primary data points. One is certainly the physical completion of the asset. And then two is the stabilization of the asset. Is the asset regularly generating revenue so that they can go to a traditional bank and get a refinancing loan to repay you? So yes, I guess it's a long-winded way to say yes. The success of the project will be contingent, will have an impact on the repayment, of course, but also in conjunction with that, that's why you also want to evaluate the other financial protections you have to protect you. What does the collateral look like? Do you have corporate repayment guarantees? What are other mechanisms you can enforce to guarantee or to enforce your repayment? So yes, it does. Other asset classes that are structured differently may have different repayment mechanisms, but I think both at Can-Am and pretty broadly in the industry, you're going to be looking for a refinancing of your EB-5 investment, just like most construction loans.
Thanks, Nick. Another short question. Can the Congress change the RIA policy before it expires in 2027?
Yes, they can. But I don't think that that's going to happen. The only thing that could happen is in 2026, there's a grandfathering clause that expires. And so there will probably be, what you might call like a technical fix to that to extend it to the, expiry of the regional center program as a whole. And there might be a couple other small changes along with that technical fix, but particularly because of the elections that are coming up and because we've had, divided government for a long time, and I think we'll continue to have divided government for a long time, there probably won't be any changes to the regional center program legislatively that would, negatively impact clients. It's not, going to go away. So I think, again, just in summation, in 2026, there might be a technical fix. It is, sort of theoretically possible for Congress to change the regional center program and send that legislation to the president to sign. But I think the likelihood of that happening is de minimis.
Okay. I'm very sorry for all the attendees. We will not be, unfortunately, able to answer all the questions because there are quite a number of questions. I think we can spend another 10 or 15 minutes. And I'm going to pick another question for, I think, George. Are there any nationalities that are not allowed to apply? And if officially all are allowed, are there any issues in reality with verifying, certifying documents and the source of funds, etc.?
There aren't any nationalities that are not, per se allowed to apply. So there are no countries, where through law or regulation, there's a rule against those individuals from pursuing a green card. There are certain countries where the United States doesn't have diplomatic relations. So that complicates actually obtaining the green card, because it means you need to travel to another country to actually complete processing your green card. You can think of like Venezuela, Iran. And yes, there are countries where source of funds is complicated. But that's mostly because there are a lot of countries where it's very difficult to move capital out of that particular country. And the ways that people do move capital out of those countries prove to be very difficult from a source of funds perspective. So you can think of, informal fund transfer mechanisms outside of something like a financial institution. And so, as I was explaining earlier, because those transactions don't occur through a licensed, sort of regulated financial institution, the ask from us as immigration attorneys, because that's what USCIS is going to ask us for, is sort of an explanation of, all of the capital that these informal networks are using to actually fund these transfers. And so that makes it extremely complicated, and that's why you see very low numbers of individuals from those types of countries actually applying for EB-5. And again, that's why at the beginning of each engagement, we sit down with clients, we understand their source of funds and what their options are in terms of source of funds, and then we sort of try to work on and address and identify and pick the best option. And then we provide a very comprehensive memo and, very comprehensive checklist of source of funds documentation to the client. And we work, based off of that. So long story short, there aren't any countries where, per se, an individual will be prohibited from seeking an EB-5 visa, but there are quite a number of countries where documenting the, again, not to keep going back to the seed, tree, fruit analogy is very complicated, usually because of, capital controls, restrictions on outbound transfers.
Okay, the next one is about the project selection. Can funds be diversified across multiple projects, locations, or regional centers?
I guess I'll take this one. In practice, it's not realistic. Again, how we're proving that jobs are created is that your money is spent on very specific job creating activity. There's an economic impact model that's involved. So most of the job creation is really proving using economic impact models, which is based on specific construction spending. So from simply an execution perspective, there's no way to efficiently capture job creation across a portfolio of projects. I think this is one of the things that, often we have questions like this, where theoretically maybe something could make sense, but in practice, there's no way to really comfortably execute it. So no, you're really going to want to select a single project with a single regional center and do your extensive due diligence on that project and make sure you're comfortable before you proceed.
Okay, the timeline for citizenship starts at what point? Thanks to
citizenship starts as soon as the client is has their lawful permanent resident status. And there are two considerations. You look at the past 5 years, and you look at whether or not the client has spent at least 30 months of those past 60 months cumulatively inside the United States. And you also look to whether or not the client has had any one trip during those 60 months in excess of 180 days outside the United States. So it's there are two numbers. One is, you take out your passport and you literally just, count your days. How many days did you physically spend inside the United States? And if that total is more than 30 months, okay, check. And then, in those 30 months, did you have one trip where you spent more than 6 months outside the United States? If yes, then that resets the clock and you measure your 5 years from whenever you got back from that trip. So those are the two considerations. You also have to demonstrate you have good moral character, which everyone on this call, should hopefully be able to do. And you have to pass like an oral and written exam to make sure you speak English and answer some relatively basic U.S. government civics type questions. The conditional residency period that we talked about, that 2-year green card, that counts towards the 5-year total. And that's so citizenship, the calculation starts when the client enters the US with lawful permanent resident status.
Yeah. At what point in time the EB-5 investor is allowed to enter the US territory? Will he or she be allowed to work?
Yes. Again, this is where the adjustment of status ability becomes very interesting for clients. If you are in the US with a visa, with any type of visa, and you've been in the US for, a relatively significant amount of time, say 90 days or more, then you can pursue your green card from inside the US. And that gives you work and travel authorization while you're waiting for your green card to be issued. But a lot of times clients think, well, I make my investment and then I get some type of visa very quickly that allows me to travel to the United States and work. But that's not reality. In a normal scenario, the client makes their investment, they file their visa petition, they wait for it to be approved, and then once it's approved, they go to a U.S. consulate or embassy abroad and complete green card processing there. There's no interim, visa or work authorization or something of that nature.
Okay. Another quick question. I'm going to take this one. How big is the family size you can put into the program? I assume into the application. It doesn't matter how big your family is. We just need to make sure the kids are under the age of 21, not married, and also spouses can be included in the application. I think maybe George can tell if there's a case of the multiple wives, multiple weddings from the families from the East. Is it possible?
You got to pick one, unfortunately. I'm not envious of that duty, but you have to pick one. And one other point that clients ask about a lot is like, what about my parents? Unfortunately, you can't include your parents as part of your family unit. Once you become a US citizen, you can petition for your parents and they can access a green card relatively quickly. But on the EB-5 filing, parents are not considered dependents.
Okay. 2 quick questions again. Is there any difference of policy regarding EB-5 between Democrats and Republicans? And the same type of question, is there EB-5 change difference by either Harris or Trump?
Well, so the president has a big degree of discretion when it comes to how immigration law and policy is administered. So when Trump was president, you saw processing times take longer. You saw like a very aggressive posture towards things like buy American, hire American. So it made getting things like E-2 visas more difficult. So in that regard, you could imagine maybe a Republican administration or a Trump administration adding additional rules that would require more work and more processing. So maybe you could imagine an increase in processing times, if anything. EB-5 is generally, I would say, appreciated by both political parties because of the job creation element. It's essentially, free job creation program for the United States. And so in that regard, it is a political winner. Having said that, because of the RIA passage, that was written into law. So a president can't come in and say, well, we're no longer doing the regional center program, or we're no longer going to issue any EB-5 visas. So in that sense, it's a stable program for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen with the contact details because we have another 5 minutes left and the questions just keep coming in. Is there any age limit for applying for EB-5?
On the outer end, there's no limit. We've had clients as old as I think 82 file. On the lower end, sometimes clients are interested in having their very young children apply. And that's possible, although children under the age of 21 in some states, or individuals under the age of 21 can't legally enter into a binding contract. And so in those types of cases, a parent will actually, sign the agreements with the regional center on behalf of the child as their representative through something called the Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. And then once the child becomes of age, the ownership interest in the regional center fund and the ownership interest in the actual funds themselves transfer over to the child. I think the outer limit that I've seen there is maybe 8 years old. We haven't had any 6 or 7 year olds, filing under the Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. So in that regard, there's, virtually no age limit.
Another quick question to Nick. What happens with the investment if the petition was rejected?
So I guess
meaning the 5 to 6 petition.
Sure. So the answer is it really depends. We do include terms in our agreements that do allow for early repayment of investors' capital for I-526E denials of certain conditions, but there are certain conditions where the I-526 denial would not warrant an early repayment. And in those situations, the investor still gets their capital back. They just need to wait until the end of the term of the project. So broadly speaking, I recommend to most investors, don't think about EB-5 as an option. Often we'll have many clients that are, maybe they're in the EB-2 queue, or maybe they're trying to get a green card through their family in addition to EB-5. They have different immigration paths and process. And if one of the other ones were to, either come through sooner, or if maybe they were concerned about an I-526E denial, they want to make sure they can get their money back as quickly as possible. And under uncertain situations, that is very much possible. And there are certain situations where they would just need to wait for the loan to mature. So broadly speaking, when you make your investment, expect it to be committed for the full term. If it's one of the circumstances where you're eligible for the early repayment, those are always honored. But there's certainly circumstances where at the worst case scenario, you would need to wait for the maturity of the project to get your funds back.
Thanks, Nick. Another question. I'm not sure if this was addressed to the attorney or to the regional center, but the question is, do the clients get a report of progress every quarter?
So that'll certainly vary by regional center. We certainly take great pride in, yes, having lots of reporting for our clients. In fact, we have a very, very well-staffed investor relations team, which in addition, is just an additional resource available to our clients. So they do get formal project update reports throughout the year. They do have access to an investor relations staff, which is there to help answer any questions about the project, about their interest payments, about their tax documents. The staff that I work on, our broker-dealer staff, we're speaking intimately with clients throughout their investments with us. I'm speaking with clients daily on my mobile phone, on email. When you start a relationship with your partner, this is a big investment. It's a very personal investment. You do deserve a lot of service, and certainly ask those questions of regional centers when you speak with them. What type of service do you provide your clients? And yes, Can-Am is very proud to report that we take our client service extremely seriously, and we have lots of resources to support you.
Thanks, Nick. Well, gentlemen, I don't think we have any much time left, but we still have around 20 questions that we have not been able to address. Those attendees who were sending their questions as an anonymous attendee, unfortunately, we will not be able to answer you. So please scan the QR code and address your question to my email or WhatsApp, or just book a one-to-one consultation and we'll try to answer all of those questions. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining our global webcast today. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, George. And we'll see everybody in December. during our next global webcast session.
Thank you, Dimitro, and thank you, Henley and Partners.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
George.
and have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.